My name is Anne Cooper. I'm a coffee roasting consultant, trainer and roaster based in Melbourne, Australia. So this is the fourth in a series of 5 videos. And in case you missed the first couple, the first one was just an introduction of myself, my career so far, but also an introduction of the topic for this particular series, and that's beyond the cooling tray. So pretty much, what are all the other things that we're focusing on besides the actual physical roasting itself? How do we know we're doing okay? Are we on the right track? And how do we set ourselves up for success every time before we roast? So we then focused on things like getting to know our machine and then getting to know the green that we're roasting, because this video is going to focus on knowing our flavors. Now, this is where it all starts to come together. So pretty much everything that we're doing in our, that we're focusing on with our roasting, all starts to rely on each other. And that's because as roasters, we have to remember we're in the business of flavor, and we often forget that. So it's really important that we remember we're roasting with the intention to deliver something to a customer to taste and enjoy. So then as roasters, we then go through this process of selecting a certain green bean. We're attracted to specific flavors, the promise of the rainbows and unicorns and strawberries and shortcake that the traders have put in the tasting notes. It's then up to us to then get to know the properties of that green, and then obviously then start roasting it. So then we need to know our roasting machines. How do we then start driving those machines and driving the coffee through a specific roast profile to then deliver flavors that we want to present to our customers? Now, the world of flavor is, as we know, incredibly subjective. So there's so many things to consider, especially in roasting. There's so many different influences, opinions on how to best roast a coffee, how it should best taste. And you will often hear that saying, there's no right or wrong in coffee, especially when it comes to flavor. So we're often faced with that tugging of the heartstrings as a roaster, where we have this desire to roast a certain way, but then we might find our customer base has other thoughts in terms of they prefer, a different roast level, a different roasting style. So we need to then decide, what are we going to do in terms of presenting the coffee to our customers? So yeah, we need to make sure we're happy, they're happy, everyone's happy. So definitely cultural palate plays a very big role in influencing the way we roast our coffee. So for those of you that have had the opportunity to travel a lot, or either work and live in a different country, getting to understand a different cultural palette as a roaster is a really, really awesome, valuable experience, because you very much get to know in terms of flavors are influenced, the flavors will influence green bean selection, and also the intended brew method and extraction will play a very big role in that as well. So things that I would do for myself, that I've started doing for myself as a roaster, is when I'm wanting to get to know the flavors, is then definitely looking at where in my portfolio is this coffee going to sit, and then of course what is my preferred roasting approach for this coffee, and then is it then going to suit an intended audience, flavor preference, and product line. So as a roaster, there's definitely things that we can do, because we often hear, unfortunately, and I hear it a lot in my training and consulting, is roasters often saying that they're not good at tasting, or they don't taste their coffee at all. They don't see the value in it. They see it as being a waste of time. So I definitely, if you are one of those roasters, would really love to encourage you to think otherwise and really understand, again, where as roasters, we are in the business of flavor. We're creating something to be tasted and enjoyed, by our customers. So it's imperative that we know how the coffee is tasting before it reaches the customers. So again, it then brings up a whole heap of other things in terms of how are we best assessing our production roasts? How are we evaluating them? How are we tasting them? And definitely one of the common conundrums with getting to know our flavors in our roasting is the tasting aspect in terms of, are we cupping for our evaluations, or are we tasting it as the intended brew, the end extraction style? Now, I do have quite a lot of roasters I work with that are very comfortable with tasting their coffee as espresso the next day after roasting. They're very comfortable going through that QC process with the coffee being quite fresh. It definitely challenges the freshness, theories. But again, who's to say it's right or wrong, because they're actually tasting and evaluating their coffee. They're getting an idea about what it tastes like before it reaches the customer. Some roasters will say that they would prefer to taste their coffee either in the cafe with their customers, which is actually, quite a valuable exercise, because it does help you build very good business relationships with your customers, and it does build that level of trust. And it's really cool too. They really love, being able to say to customers, oh, here's the roaster. They, roasted the coffee and they're here with us, just doing some tasting and quality checking. And, they're really quite proud, to have the roaster step in store and taste and work with them. But if that roaster hasn't tasted the coffee before it reaches the customer, and unfortunately, if the coffee doesn't taste that good in store, and all things have been checked off to make sure that it's not an extraction issue or machine issue, storage issue, things like that, it can be quite unfortunate for that roaster to try and explain why it's not tasting that good if they haven't done their own due diligence with their own assessment and evaluation. So yeah, definitely encouraging roasters to don't get caught into that I'm too busy excuse as well. Definitely more than ever in the industry, we do have a lot more owner operators, and unfortunately time is one of those things that that owner operators don't have enough of. So definitely using the I'm too busy excuse is definitely something that's thrown around quite a lot, as well as a reason for not tasting coffee, not evaluating, not tasting enough. But then on the opposite, some roasters do go over the top and actually overanalyze and overtaste their coffee to the point where they're tasting so many samples in one session, they become so fatigued that they're not able to make a good judgment or evaluation about their coffee. So yeah, it's a bit of a balancing act in terms of making sure that you're assessing your coffee appropriately at the right time and consistently, and keeping it nice and simple as well. So one thing I like to encourage roasters to do in terms of how to better understand how to evaluate their coffee, how to taste their coffee and understand flavors, is to start with something very simple with just like a tasting plate. So it's again going back to when we're purchasing a green bean and we're faced with this really big list of taste descriptors from whether it be the producer or the traders that we're dealing with. They all sound really attractive, but then as a roaster, it's quite challenging if you don't understand, again, your machine, your roasting style and your profile. You will struggle understanding how to get the best out of that coffee and express all of those flavors that you are attracted to and looking for in that coffee. So before you start blaming everything else but yourself, I would definitely encourage roasters to practice. So flavor preference in the coffee industry is quite interesting because, yeah, as we hear, there's often the saying, there's no right or wrong. And that's true because there's so many differences of opinion. There's so many different ideas on how best to roast a coffee, how it should taste. And that's, again, all being influenced by cultural palate preference and the intended end, brew method and extraction. So one thing I do encourage roasters to do is when they're practicing their tasting evaluation, when they're faced with that list of notes, is to actually get a tasting plate and actually taste the elements themselves. Because again, this is where cultural palate will rear its head. Now, one of the best situations I had about a month ago is I had some students from Korea in my roasting course, and one of the tasting notes was strawberry. And you would think strawberry's a pretty easy flavor note to connect with. Well, actually, it's definitely not, in the sense that we quickly, they highlighted to me that strawberries in Australia are incredibly acidic, and strawberries in Korea are just the complete opposite. They're outrageously lush, fleshy, sweet, jammy, like everything you would expect a really, beautiful, intense, beautiful strawberry flavor to be like. And they said, yeah, when they came to Australia and tasted a strawberry, it was just the complete opposite. And they're right. So now my bucket list is to go to Korea and taste a strawberry. But it was a really awesome reminder, again, of that cultural palate influence, that flavor that can have on flavor for us as roasters. And then how do we then perceive that in our end roasted product? So then doing a tasting plate with them was really, really fun. So there's two key plates along with the actual notes listed from the traders that we'll actually taste. It's really great always choosing a coffee that has a range of high acidity through to the more sugar browning, warmer notes. So it's really fun when you've got a coffee and they'll say things like, this coffee has crisp green apple acidity. Oh, and by the way, you're also going to taste toffee, brown sugar, caramel, chocolate, all those kind of yummy warm things. So it's really fun grabbing those coffees and then roasting them specifically to really highlight those different flavor notes that can be found in that coffee. So we always do 3 different roasting styles with that coffee. So we'll do a sample roast, a filter roast, and an espresso roast. And we do find then moving from those 3 different roasting styles, there's the opportunity to really further explore that range of tasting notes that was, described that can be found in that coffee. So besides those notes, some for yourselves in terms of if you do, so some people say, I really struggle with sweetness or I really struggle with acidity. So there's 2 fun plates I really love to do. One is just tasting a green apple and a red apple. Now, sounds really simple, but for me, it's one of the most fun, amazing tasting exercises ever. So when you taste the green apple first, of course, it's very crisp, very clean, and just very refreshing. And it does remind you of that, what I would consider to be a true malic apple-like acidity. And then you taste a red apple. Oh my goodness. It is just like chalk and cheese for me in terms of straight away on this red apple, we're tasting rose and floral. It's incredibly fleshy and sweet, maybe even a hint of Turkish delight. And I'm going, what? How is this happening? It's just a red apple. It also reminded me of the first time I tasted apples from Portland, especially the Honeycrisp apple. Wowza. So really opening, your eyes in terms of just how simple it can be tasting a green apple and a red apple and really helping you better connect with specific flavor notes in terms of crisp green apple acidity versus more of a fleshy, sweet, juicy, floral, rosy red apple. And then another fun plate to do to help you better understand your flavors when you're cupping and tasting and evaluating is to do a citrus plate. So start with a juicy orange because you do get that, that squishy sensation of when you're drinking, a glass of juice, with your breakfast or at any time. And it is very sweet. And then start tasting a lime. So limes are still incredibly sweet, but then they start to dip their toes into a little bit of sourness. So you've got this little bit of, sweetness and then that little bit of that, burning sensation of the sourness starting to head towards the back of your throat. So then when you go to taste the lemon, that's when you get that really true sour flavor. For me, it's like that a really nice kind of warming sensation starting to go into the back of my throat. And then finish with a grapefruit. So grapefruit bitterness is a really beautiful way to, to taste bitterness in a really beautiful format. So, again, it's very clean, it's very crisp, a little bit drying. So having a really nice hoppy IPA But again, a very simple way to take yourself through that tasting journey of better understanding citrus. So simple exercises like that are fantastic. But then it also leads into helping us also get to know when producers are experimenting, because now more than ever with our green, as we touched on with knowing our green, producers are really changing up their processing technique, and they're really challenging traditional thought processes, and in particular flavors of an origin that we would have a potential expected, flavor expectation from. So as we mentioned with the green, we've gone from having washed Colombians now to natural processed Colombians. So we've gone from really beautiful, sweet, clean flavors to incredibly rich, funky, fruity, very fruit forward, intense flavors coming from a Colombian. And also, of course, producers in Brazil, for example, if you haven't tasted a coffee from Fazenda, California, from Luis Rodriguez, where he's really pushing the boundaries in terms of really making us think differently about Brazil coffee. So again, as a roaster, you're tasting this Brazil coffee and you're going, there's full-on acidity in this coffee, and I did not roast this coffee light to influence that acidity. It's definitely coming from the green, and it's definitely coming from the processing technique. And that's exciting, and it's challenging, and potentially, a little bit nerve-wracking as well, but incredibly exciting. Thanks for listening, and I will see you for the next video.